Dear brothers and sisters in Christ and friends of Our Lady, it's always a great joy to come to this particular church dedicated to Our Lady, Help of Christians. I've said this before several times on my visits here, which reminds me of my old school in Battersea, the Salesian College, Battersea, where I attended many, many years ago. The motto for St. John Bosco's order, the Salesians, is Our Lady, Help of Christians. And so it's always a great joy to come here. That's one of the reasons anyway. And you have come here today to participate in Marian devotions. And my wish is to encourage you in your Marian devotions and to encourage you to participate fully in the church that Mary's son founded, the Catholic Church. And my talk today is based on Our Lady, and there's so many titles of Our Lady. What does one choose from? Well, Monday we have a big feast day, Our Lady of Walsingham. It used to be called Our Lady of Ransom, and probably most of you here will remember that feast day by that particular title, Our Lady of Ransom. In the Guild of Our Lady of Ransom, Monsignor Stark, the walks in London, which he used to have every month. The objects of the Guild are the conversion of England and Wales back to the Catholic faith, the restoration of the lapsed back to their faith, their true home, and of course the prayers for the forgotten dead. They're the three objects of the Guild of Our Lady of Ransom. Last Saturday was the feast of Our Lady of Sorrows. On that day we meditated on the sorrows of Our Lady, and one of the sorrows was that the prophecy of Simeon was fulfilled at Calvary, remember. We recall the words of Simeon saying to Our Blessed Lady with St. Joseph in the presentation that a sword will pierce your heart. And that time when the soldier thrust the lance into the side of Our Blessed Lord and blood and water flowed out, at that time the sword pierced Our Lady's heart with great sorrow. And so today I would like to share a reflection on Our Lady with the title Our Lady of Sorrows. A few days ago, Wednesday, was the feast of Our Lady of Salette in France. Now this is an apparition approved by the Church, Our Lady of Salette. Our Lady appeared to two children, two shepherd children, Melanie and Maximum, in the year 1846. And she appeared weeping, crying. For 2 hours she wept with those two children and told them many things which they were told to make known later. The two main messages of La Salette, and at the time it was a time of anti-clerical activities. The church was in a poor state. Remember the curé de Ars, when he was sent to Ars, he found nobody went to church on Sundays. Well, that was the atmosphere of France after the French Revolution. And so Our Lady said, people are forgetting my son, they're working on Sundays, and they should be going to Mass on Sundays. That was the first message which Our Lady gave to the two children, to keep the Sabbath day holy, to refrain from servile works. That's what she said. And the second message was a bit more complicated. It was to do with the clergy, really, criticising the lax clergy, which is very important. And so this message was proclaimed later on, 1879. It wasn't very popular, of course, because of the criticising the clergy. But it's very important that the clergy do not become lax, etc. One of the mystical experiences that Melanie had, the young shepherdess later on in life, was as a young person still, was the value of what she used to say, hearing Mass, going to Mass. Not necessarily on Sundays, but other times as well. And I'm sure you know you do this anyway, some of you. Hearing Mass, because this was an apparition that Melanie experienced. She was at a church one day, and she went into the church and she saw a priest in the front pew, and she thought out of politeness she would stay at the back, won't interfere with him. But in some way she was transported to the front with that particular priest, and she was next to him. He spoke to her. He told her that he was destined to be 30 years in purgatory because of his laxity in doing his duties. And he was told that she would be able to release him from purgatory if she heard Mass for him. And so, 3 days later, she came to church, and her intention was for this particular priest. And after the Mass was celebrated, she saw that particular priest dressed in a very fine clerical clothes rather than the poor clothes he was in before, and she was given the indication that his soul was now going to heaven. And this is a wonderful example of the importance of hearing Mass. There's another example of hearing Mass. It's in France again, but a poor lady goes into a butcher's shop and asks the butcher for some meat, and he says, "How much have you got?" And she says, "I've got no money, but I will hear Mass for you." And the butcher was talking to an army officer at the time, joking, that they laughed at her really. She went out of the shop and she went to Mass. And she came back and they were still talking, the army officer and the butcher. And she said, "I've just heard Mass." And the butcher laughed at her really. He said, "Well, I'll just write down on a bit of paper." He said, "You've heard Mass for me." And so he wrote on a bit of paper, "I've just heard Mass for you." And he said, "I'll give you meat which to the value of that bit of paper." And he put a very small bone on the scales, but the paper weighed more. He was rather surprised at this and put a little bit more meat on. The paper still weighed more than the meat. He tried a larger bone, and of course the paper still weighed more. The butcher was getting rather alarmed at this and thought the scales were broken, so he tested the scales and they were working perfectly all right. So as it went on, he got a larger bit of meat, and still the paper weighed more. And so in the end, he said to the lady, "Look, okay, I'll give you what you want." He became a Catholic, apparently, and the army officer likewise had a great devotion for the Mass afterwards, both of them. The butcher's sons became priests, two of his sons became priests, and so there's a true story of the value of hearing Mass, and so I want to encourage you in that. When the priest holds up the paten with the host on it and offers it to God the Father in heaven, this is the time to make our own intentions with the priest. And the offering made to God in heaven, God the Father Almighty in heaven, the offering is more pleasing to God than all these sins of the world are displeasing to him. I'll repeat that. The offering in Mass to God the Father of his only Son is more pleasing to God the Father than all the sins of the world are displeasing to him. So this is a great encouragement from the Melanie, one of the shepherdess girls. Now, another title of Our Lady of Sorrows, it all started in Lithuania in the year 1608. Lithuania accepted Christianity. The last country in Europe to become Christian was Lithuania in 1251, the 13th century, quite late. In the 15th century, Masco, a Catholic businessman from a town called Šiluva, went to Rome on business presumably, and he acquired a picture of Our Lady. He brought it back to the church and gave it to the parish priest, and it was put in the church. So far, so good. Well, when the Reformation started in Europe, Šiluva was not, or Lithuania was not exempt from that, and the whole parish became Calvinist. People had to obey the Calvinist pastor. The mayor was Calvinist. And so Catholicity was dying out. Children tending their sheep once more near a rock. In 1608, they heard a noise. They looked round and they saw Our Lady weeping. They told their parents that evening. The parents were surprised and they thought it might be Our Lady. The whole village the next day went out to this particular spot, and the Calvinist minister went with them. He told them not to be so foolish. Popish superstition, he said. A lot of old rubbish. Forget it. It's the devil's work. And while he was saying this, there was a noise. Everyone looked round and saw Our Lady weeping. And the Calvinist minister eventually said, "Why are you weeping, lady?" And she said to him, and I can quote the words actually, "Who are you and why are you weeping?" The lady replied, "There was a time when my beloved son was worshipped by all the people in this village, but now they have all fallen away because they are forced to take part in something which is not their tradition, and they have given up their true belief." Well, those words were spoken. The people knew what Our Lady was saying, and that encouraged them to go back to their faith. A man in a neighbouring village who was over 100 years old was blind, but he remembered when he was a young man of 20, he had helped the parish priest hide the picture and the chalices and the sacred vestments. They went out into a field, and he remembered helping the parish priest to bury them. And so he heard about these goings on, and he wanted to come and help the people to find the vestments again and the picture. They led him to the spot where the rock was, and immediately his sight was restored. They started digging where he said, and they found all these vestments, the picture and chalices were still there intact, and they were restored to the church. And so that's another little miracle of Our Lady. Now we could ask ourselves why we didn't know about all this, because Lithuania was controlled by the communists for so many years, and they banned anyone talking about it. As you know, they persecuted Christians for many years, and it wasn't until the 1980s that it became free of communist control. And so this is why we haven't heard of Our Lady of Šiluva in Lithuania. And it's a very interesting place to go. There are pilgrimages to these places in Lithuania, organised by the Divine Mercy Apostolate. So I just wanted to encourage you in that direction, the wonderful miracles of Our Lady. And so we have so many wonderful feast days. I mentioned Monday's feast day of Our Lady of Walsingham. Now it was called Our Lady of Ransom, of course. And that's a wonderful history of that particular feast day. It goes back to the 14th century when three men had a vision of Our Lady at the same time, and they were asked to form a society to ransom Christians from the Turks. The religious order had an extra vow. Apart from chastity, poverty and obedience, the vow was to give yourself up in exchange for a prisoner, to take the place of a Christian who was held captive, which was a very brave thing to do. And this is why the ransomers are known. But we don't have the same reasons now, but the guild is still in operation. Monsignor Stark is retiring soon, or has retired, but the guild is still there with the same objects: to pray for the conversion of England back to the Catholic faith, the restoration of the lapsed Catholics, and also to pray for the forgotten dead. And that's a big one, praying for the forgotten dead, of course, because one could say that most people who die are not, their lives aren't necessarily forgotten, but their souls are, you know. It's only the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church which prays, or the High Anglican Church, which prays for the souls in purgatory to any large degree. And so we do have a great devotion to the Holy Souls, I know, in our parishes. The Holy Souls can be our friends. They're prisoners of the King. They're suffering, certainly, yes, but their suffering is a joyful suffering. There's a joyful suffering because they know they're going to be with God forever in perfect happiness eventually. And our prayers can certainly help them attain their wish. And of course, in justice, of course, if we help holy souls in justice, they will certainly help us in our pilgrimage of life. There's so many different experiences with holy souls, and Padre Pio's feast day is coming up soon, isn't it? And so it's tomorrow, isn't it? Sunday. Padre Pio, he had a great devotion to the holy souls, and they visited him, spoke to him, he prayed for them, and they got to heaven quicker through his intercessions for them. So I want to encourage you in your devotions to Our Lady, our Mother, and to the Holy Mother Church, which our Son founded, and all these lovely devotions, so that we go closer to God, because it's a preparation for being with God forever. If we endeavour to be closer to God in this life, we're making a good preparation for being with God forever in the next life.